A boy stands perfectly still during inspection. Under his cloak, a fox is eating him alive, claws tearing into his stomach, teeth ripping through skin, blood soaking into fabric. He doesn't flinch, doesn't cry out, doesn't move. By the time they dismiss him, the damage is fatal. He dies in silence. And Sparta celebrates this. This isn't legend, this isn't exaggeration. Multiple ancient sources record this story because it represented the ideal, the perfect student. This is what happened when you train children correctly. A 7-year-old is taken from his mother today. He won't see her for years. Tonight, he sleeps on reeds. He cut himself. Tomorrow, he wakes to deliberate starvation. He's expected to steal food to survive. If he's caught, he's beaten, not for stealing, for failing. By age 20, he will have killed an unarmed man in the dark without trial, without hesitation. The state will call this citizenship. What you're about to hear is documented, cross-referenced, witnessed by ancient historians who visited Sparta and recorded what they saw with their own eyes. This is how Sparta turned children into weapons, not through inspiration, not through courage, through systematic psychological dismantling. And here's what no one tells you. It worked so perfectly that it destroyed them. Let me give you the situation Sparta faced. Picture a city-state, maybe 9,000 full citizens at its peak. Could be less. Ancient sources vary, but the range is narrow, a small population. Now picture 200,000 people working the land around them. These weren't immigrants. They weren't foreign slaves shipped in from conquered territories. They were Greeks. Same language, same gods, same ancestors. They were called helots, and they outnumbered Spartans somewhere between 7-1 and 20-1, depending on the century. The helots farmed the land, grew the food, harvested the crops. They lived in the same valleys, walked the same roads, spoke the same dialect. They knew the terrain. They knew where weapons were stored. They knew when the men were away at war. And they remembered. They remembered when their grandparents had been free, when these lands had belonged to their own city-states before Sparta conquered them. Every year, Sparta declared war on the helots, not metaphorically officially, a formal declaration. This wasn't about battles, it was about legality. It made killing a helot at any time for any reason a legal act of war rather than murder. Think about what that means for a society's psychology. You wake up every day surrounded by people who outnumber you 10-1, people who grow your food, people who could poison it, people who know your children's names. You cannot leave. You cannot flee. Spartan citizens were forbidden from traveling extensively or living abroad. Isolation was law. So you have two options: live in constant fear or eliminate fear entirely. Sparta chose option 2, but that required something unprecedented. They couldn't simply train soldiers. Soldiers have breaking points. Soldiers feel fear. Soldiers question orders when those orders violate basic human instincts. They needed something that wouldn't break. The Agoge was the answer. If you're fascinated by the documented systems that engineered obedience in history's most extreme societies, hit subscribe. We're just getting started with how Sparta turned complete psychological control into a science that ultimately consumed itself. Birth doesn't guarantee life in Sparta. A father doesn't name his son. A mother doesn't decide if he lives. The infant is brought before the elders, the Gerousia. These are men over 60, elected for life. They examine the baby's body. They look for deformities, weakness, unusual proportions, signs of future illness. Modern scholars debate what happened to rejected infants. The popular image babies thrown into a chasm called the apathete comes largely from Plutarch, writing 500 years after Sparta's peak. He may have been repeating legend, but exposure was real. Exposure is documented across the Greek world. An unwanted infant placed outside city limits died from elements or animals, or was taken by someone desperate enough to raise a child not their own. Either way, the father returned home without his son. For those who passed inspection, early childhood was brief. You stay with your mother until age 7. You learn to speak, to walk, to understand that you are Spartan, which means you are not like other Greeks. At 7, the state takes you, not metaphorically, physically. You leave your home, you enter the Agoge. You will not return to live with your family. Not at 8, not at 15, not at 25, Your name is recorded in a new list. Your identity is now institutional. The transition is immediate, no preparation, no gradual adjustment. One day you sleep in your mother's house. The next day you sleep in a barracks with 100 other boys under the supervision of a young man barely older than you. Russia's reeds. They cut themselves from the Eurotas River. In winter they're allowed to add thistle down for warmth. That's the extent of bedding. One cloak, that's the clothing ration. Year-round, a single rough garment. No shoes, not in summer, not in winter, not on rocky ground. The soles of their feet thicken with calluses. This is not accidental. Spartan military doctrine will later depend on rapid movement over difficult terrain. Shoes are a weakness. Shoes can be lost, feet cannot. But the most calculated element is food. They are fed, but not enough. The rations are deliberately insufficient. A boy finishes his meal hungry. He goes to bed hungry. He wakes hungry. Plutarch describes the portion as calculated to make them keen to satisfy their needs through their own resourcefulness. Translation: you're expected to steal, not from merchants outside Sparta. That's unavailable. Spartan citizens don't engage in trade. The economy runs on helot labor. And boys don't leave the training grounds. They steal from each other, from storage areas, from the communal messes. And here's the mechanism that makes it work. Stealing is not punished. Getting caught is punished. If you steal successfully, you eat, you survive. You're demonstrating the resourcefulness a Spartan needs. If you're caught, you're beaten publicly in front of your unit. Not because stealing is wrong, because incompetence is unacceptable. The distinction matters. This isn't moral education, it's operant conditioning. The lesson isn't don't steal, the lesson is don't fail. One story survives in multiple ancient sources. A boy stole a fox. Accounts vary on why, possibly to eat it, possibly as a test of courage. He hid it under his cloak. During an inspection, the fox began tearing into his stomach, clawing, biting, drawing blood. The boy stood silent, expression neutral. He didn't cry out, didn't move, didn't reveal what was happening. By the time the inspection ended, the fox had caused fatal injuries. Modern readers hear this and think, that's insane, that's suicidal. But that's the point. The value system is clear. Death is preferable to revealing weakness. Pain is preferable to failure. Physical destruction is preferable to social disgrace. This story was told for centuries. It was celebrated. It was the standard. The boys are organized into units, aguli, or herds. Each herd has a leader, the iron, usually around 20 years old. He has absolute authority over the younger boys. He can order punishments. He participates in beatings. His word is law. But he's also being watched. His leadership is being evaluated. How he manages the boys determines his own advancement. The system is self-enforcing. The victim becomes the enforcer. The enforcer knows he's being evaluated for his willingness to enforce. Every interaction is observed. Every moment is a test. There are no private spaces, no solitude, no opportunity to develop an independent identity separate from group surveillance. This is the environment where personality is supposed to form. Ages 7 through 20, the years when human beings develop their sense of self, their values, their conception of relationships. Instead, there's only the group, only the hierarchy, only the state. Emotional attachment to family is systematically suppressed. Boys don't return home for holidays. There are no family visits to the barracks. Mothers don't comfort their sons. One Spartan mother, in a famous anecdote, sends her son off to battle with the instruction, "Come back with your shield or on it. Victory or death. No other outcome is acceptable." Modern readers hear this and think that's just a dramatic way of saying be brave, but listen to what it actually means. Come back victorious or come back dead. Do not come back defeated. Do not come back if you fled. Do not come back if you dropped your shield to run faster. If you return alive and defeated, you are not welcome. That's not encouragement, that's a threat. And it comes from his mother. The Agoge doesn't just train boys, it trains the entire society to reinforce the same value system. Mothers, wives, sisters, everyone participates in the mechanism of shame. Physical training is constant, wrestling, running, combat drills. But ancient sources emphasize that the physical component was secondary. Plutarch says the Agoge was designed to produce obedience, endurance, and victory in battle. Obedience is listed first. It's not an accident. The most grueling test was the diamastagosis, the whipping ordeal at the altar of Artemis Author. Boys were whipped in front of spectators, not as punishment, as demonstration. The goal was to endure without crying out, without showing pain for as long as possible. Some died during the ritual. This was documented in later periods as a spectacle that attracted tourists. Romans came to watch Spartan boys bleed. By then, Sparta was a shell of its former power. Entertainment, it was conditioning. You will suffer. You will not react. Your body is not yours. Your pain is not yours. You exist for the state. Around age 18 or 19, a selection occurs. The most capable, the most loyal, the most thoroughly conditioned boys are chosen for something that ancient sources describe with unusual unease. The cryptia, the word means secret or hidden. Thucydides mentions it, Plato references it, Plutarch describes it in detail. Aristotle calls it disturbing. Here's what happened. Selected youths were sent out alone into the Helot territories. They were given a knife, sometimes a short sword, no armor, no supplies. By day they hid in the countryside, unseen, undetected. By night they moved. Their targets were helots. Specifically helots identified as strong, capable, or defiant. The ones who might lead a rebellion, the ones who might organize resistance. The youths killed them quietly in the dark, without trial, without warning. Then they returned to hiding. This continued for an unspecified period, weeks, possibly months. Scholars debate the frequency and scale. Some argue it was a regular institution. Others suggest it was activated only during periods of tension. But the sources are consistent. On one point it happened. The purpose was not military. Helots were unarmed. They weren't enemy soldiers. The purpose was psychological. Think about what this does to an 18-year-old. You've spent 11 years learning that obedience is survival, that suffering is normal, that your identity is collective. Now you're told, kill someone who has not attacked you, someone who is unarmed, someone who is enslaved by your state. Kill them in secret. Don't hesitate, don't question. If you hesitate, you've failed. If you question, you're not fully loyal. This is the final test, the final severing. The last potential attachment to shared humanity is cut away. You are not a Greek among Greeks. You are not a person with moral boundaries. You are a Spartan. You do what the state requires. And if that means killing an unarmed man in the dark because he looked too strong, too proud, too capable, then that's what you do. The ones who returned without hesitation, without trauma, without doubt, those became full citizens. The crypt was a filter. It separated those who still had limits from those who didn't. At age 20, you become a full-time soldier, but you don't become independent. You live in barracks. Still, you eat in communal messes, sitia. Every meal is with your unit, supervised, ritualized. The food is deliberately unpleasant. The famous black broth was notorious even in ancient times. One foreign visitor, after tasting it, reportedly said, "Now I understand why Spartans are so willing to die." The point wasn't nutrition, it was uniformity. Luxury was weakness, pleasure was distraction, marriage was allowed technically, but a Spartan man didn't live with his wife. He visited her at night in secret. Some sources describe young husbands sneaking away from barracks to see their wives briefly, then returning before dawn. Children were born, but fathers didn't raise them. The state did. At age 30, after 23 years in the system, a man finally achieved full citizenship. He could attend the assembly, he could vote, but he still lived in the barracks, still ate in the messes, still trained daily. This continued until age 60. Think about that timeline. From age 7 to age 60, a Spartan man's life was institutionalized. 53 years of communal living, of surveillance, of ritualized behavior. By the time you're 60, you've spent the majority of your life in this system. There is no you separate from it. There is no identity that was formed outside institutional control. The result was exactly what Sparta needed. In battle, Spartan units didn't break. They didn't flee. They didn't panic. At Thermopylae, 300 Spartans and their allies held a mountain pass against a Persian army that numbered in the hundreds of thousands. They held for 3 days. They died in formation. At Plateau, the Spartan infantry held their line while allied Greek forces around them collapsed. They turned a near defeat into a crushing victory. For nearly 2 centuries, Sparta dominated Greek warfare. Not because Spartan soldiers were stronger or faster or more skilled with weapons, but because fear of disgrace exceeded fear of death, because running was worse than dying, because the group was everything and the individual was nothing. The Agoge worked, but systems optimized for one thing tend to fail at everything else. Sparta's citizen population declined steadily. The standards were too high. Not every boy survived the Agoge, disease, accidents, the brutality itself. Some didn't make it to 20, and the requirements for citizenship were rigid. You had to complete the Agoge. You had to contribute to a common mess. You had to own land worked by helilots. As land became concentrated among fewer families, fewer men could meet the property requirement. They lost citizenship. War casualties removed citizens permanently. Sparta didn't have reserves, didn't have a broader population to draw from. Every Spartan who died in battle was irreplaceable. By 371 BC, when Sparta faced thieves at the Battle of Lyra, the army that took the field was smaller than it had been a century earlier. They lost. It wasn't even close. The Thean general Epaminondas used an innovative formation, a weighted left flank that crushed the Spartan right. In a single afternoon, Sparta lost approximately 400 citizens out of a total population that may have numbered only 1,500 full citizens remaining. That's more than a quarter of their entire citizenship. Dead. In one battle, there were no replacements. The system that had produced perfect soldiers had no mechanism for recovery, no flexibility, no adaptation. You couldn't recruit foreigners and put them through the Agoge. They weren't Spartan. You couldn't shorten the training. That would compromise the product. You couldn't expand citizenship criteria. That would dilute the standards. The machine could only do one thing, and when it broke, it couldn't be fixed. Within a few decades, Sparta became a secondary power. By the Roman period, it was a tourist attraction. Visitors came to watch the whipping rituals, to see the remnants of a society that had once terrified the Greek world. The Agoge continued in modified form for centuries, but it was a performance. Recreation of a dead system for an audience that no longer feared it. The society that sacrificed everything for military perfection achieved that perfection and then collapsed, because perfection in one dimension creates catastrophic fragility in all others. Sparta's secret wasn't that it was brutal. Lots of ancient societies were brutal. The secret was precision. The Ago was social engineering, systematic, calculated, designed to eliminate every variable that might produce disobedience. It worked exactly as intended. It produced warriors who could not be broken and a society that could not survive. What remains is documentation cross-referenced across multiple ancient sources, descriptions that make modern readers uncomfortable because they're not mythology, they're procedure. Instructions for how to dismantle a human being and rebuild them as something that doesn't question, doesn't hesitate, doesn't break until the system itself breaks. And when it does, there's nothing